Today I'm joined by Michelle Gundy on Resume Revelators Hired Calling podcast. Dr. Michelle Gundy, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Fantastic. It's a great day here in San Diego. Where are you located?
I'm in New York. I'm up in Yonkers.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're at least 3 hours ahead. How's the weather?
It's beautiful. It's finally sunny out. We've had a bunch of rain, and I'm sure it's not as beautiful as San Diego, though. I'm definitely envious there.
Yeah, it's definitely hard to leave here. So this podcast thing is a new thing that started spawned from my research in veterans underemployment.
Absolutely.
And I think it's very important for veterans to hear from other veterans about how they've succeeded and where they get to in life and how. But you have a doctorate from USC also on top of all this. I'm wearing my shirt for us today, Fight On. And I want to get from your time in the Army. I think that last year up until to where you are now, and tell us how you did it, what you studied on. I'm really interested to hear about your dissertation. I know you were working in trauma advised policing, and I'm sure that I don't really know what that is. I would love to hear about that a bit too when you get to that point. So I'll stop talking now and let you tell us a bit about yourself.
Sure. Well, first of all, I've been out of the military. It seems like, it's been a full lifetime outside. I joined in 2002, right after 9/11. I was an inexperienced college kid. I grew up in Las Vegas, Nevada, and the school district there did not prepare me for the real world. So I got to my first semester of college, and I was just absolutely not prepared. I knew I needed to grow up fast. So 9/11 had just happened. It seemed like a great time to join the military, and I knew I needed some discipline and some confidence and some real world experience. So joined the military, joined the Army, and spent 5 years in. And I really thought I was going to be a lifer. Unfortunately, our unit, we had the best leader I've ever served under. Our first sergeant was in Swiss Army Brown. He left. He went to CAB and he became a command sergeant major eventually, and our unit sort of fell apart. So I really got some firsthand experience on exceptional leadership, followed by just terrible leadership. And so, under his guidance, he said, hey, this is just not a place for you anymore. I don't feel comfortable with you staying in the unit. I think it's time to ETS. So I ETS'd. He helped me find my first real world job. I did valet at a casino in Vegas. He actually got me that job. And that was sort of how I transitioned out. And I worked in hospitality for a few years, and I was sort of lost. Didn't know what I wanted to do. And then finally decided to use the GI Bill, go back to school, and, get started. So I worked for about 20 years in communications, and decided in 2019-ish that I wanted a doctorate, and found the program at USC, went back and got my doctorate in organizational change and leadership. And yes, you're correct. The focus of my dissertation was trauma-informed policing, and so I've been working in policing and public safety ever since.
So thank you for that overview. It's interesting. I want to dive into some of the details.
Sure.
So we were in at the same time. You got out in 2007 as well.
Mm-hmm.
Did you use any veteran support organizations for transition support whenever you got out?
I didn't even know they existed back then. If they did, I don't even know if they were around when we served and we got out. My only transition service was my first sergeant getting me my first job. So no, I used nothing. I was just out there sort of winging it.
What about the TAP program? Do you guys have a TAP program when you transitioned out? The government provided tuition or the transition classes, how to do a resume, how to do an interview. These are your VA benefits available and so forth.
I've never even heard of it until just now.
Well, it definitely has changed. There were nonprofits out there for us then. I didn't use any either.
Okay.
But there are definitely more now. There's over 50,000 according to CAPSTAR. There's a book about it titled "The Sea of Goodwill," where there's the pros and cons, right, to having so many, because some veterans report just being overwhelmed with who to go to, what to do, because there's so many overlapping missions and names, and there's a lot of issues with some organizations not living up to what they say and claim. So it's a messy place right now, but there are some really great ones that exist. So then your first job when you got out was valet at a casino in Vegas.
Yeah.
So your unit in the Army, what was your role?
I started as a 31 Lima, so I was cable and wire. But as soon as I got back from AIT, to my unit, we transitioned from cable and wire to SATCOM. So I went to, I think, 2 or 3, I don't even remember now if it's long, but 2 or 3 additional MOS schools, 31, I think, Romeo, 31 Fox, maybe 31 Uniform. And we did SATCOM, but I was sort of the first sergeant's, I guess, assistant, you could call me. So I ended up working in the office with him and a few other support staff, most of my time in, that's where I spent.
Okay, so you left with SATCOM experience in a time when that wasn't necessarily the hottest thing in the world, but
Correct.
it's definitely hot now, right? It's a big world. There's a lot of changes in the satellite space, and we're living through another space boom. Okay, so after you went to valet cars, what was your next role? So what was the big transition from roles that that we've all done, where it's parking cars, doing pressure washing, bagging groceries. We've all had these kind of things. It's interesting to hear, whose story, who did what, whose job was the worst whenever they got out. What brought you into your career and into the goodness that you're experiencing now?
So after I was working valet for a while, and one of the valet's wives did cocktails across the street at the Palms. And she was like, "Why aren't you in valet? You should do cocktails." And I was like, "I don't know." So she got me a job cocktailing, and that got me into hospitality. So I worked in some of the biggest nightclubs in the world in Las Vegas for several years. And it was great. It was fun. But that type of job has a very short lifespan, especially as someone who had been in the military. I felt like I had a bigger purpose in life. I felt like I was, supposed to be doing something better than serving bottles, in nightclubs to rich jerks. And which was really what it was back then, because that was before sort of the economy collapsed. And so people were just spending money, and it just wasn't for me. So I did that for several years. And finally, I just decided I needed to get out of there. And I started going back to school. And I got an associate's, and then decided to switch paths a little bit. And then I went back to school for communications. And I followed that all the way through. I did a bachelor's in communications, master's in communications, two graduate certificates in strategic communications, and then finally the doctorate. So I've had my fair share of crummy jobs, and that includes in the corporate sector as well.
For sure. So the schooling you took, that was mostly paid for by the GI Bill, or did you get any scholarships or anything else around that?
No, not really. The GI Bill covered some in the beginning, but obviously there's a cap on that. It doesn't pay for forever. So I think it ran out. I don't remember around the batch. I think it paid for the bachelor's, and then that was a wrap. So after that, I just decided that if I wanted to go back, I needed to foot the bill and pay my way through. So no, I didn't get scholarships. One of my corporate gigs paid for a little bit of my tuition. So if there are veterans out there who don't have the GI Bill or don't have tuition opportunities, I would look for companies that offer tuition assistance, because that was a big help for a big chunk of my master's degree.
For sure, and there's plenty of programs out there, or some, and that's actually, but it's kind of dwindling away. Less and less companies are doing it, but there's so many education programs that exist that, I mean, even I don't know about, and I spend a lot of time in this space. I see new ones all the time, but it's the challenge to get into them is almost a full-time job in some ways, but there is some support out there. Looks like you've also spent some time in the entrepreneurial space. Maybe about Body Integration Studio.
Yeah, Body Integration was my pet project. In 2019, around the same time that I decided to go back to school for the doctorate program, I was talking with my current CEO, and I've worked in tech for 11 years, and it was just a glass ceiling for me. I was not going to advance there, and I didn't really want to stay in tech. And I told him, the CEO, I said, I'm going to venture out on my own once this program gets underway and I get this new skill set. And he didn't want to, lose me as an employee. Knew that I was a hard worker. I worked for him for 11 years. We had a pretty close professional relationship. So he said, "Why don't we start a business together? Anything you want, just sort of write me a business plan and let's talk about it." And I had I was a big fitness, nerd, which I'm sure, a bunch of your audience can relate to. The Army taught me about fitness. I hadn't worked out a day in my life until I joined the military, and got out of there, hit the floor ground running, and I've been, working out and lifting weights ever since. So I had 20 years of gym rat experience under my belt, and I thought, here's a whole list of all the things that everyone hates about gyms. What if I started a fitness studio and got rid of all these things that we hate so much? And I wanted to. I was trauma informed by that point. I had researched trauma for my master's degree, and I wanted to incorporate trauma. And so I said, what if I developed a trauma informed exercise program for first responders. So for cops and for firefighters and for EMS and this is trauma informed. We get them in this space, and then we teach them about PTSD while we're doing these exercise regimens. And so that was the plan. We were going to build it was a ground up construction, $16 million project, and I worked on it for 3 years. And unfortunately, COVID just killed us. Towards the end, when we were getting ready to break ground, every 30 days we had to rebid, and costs were going up 30% across the board. So you talk about 6 months, 30 days at a time, and 30% each time. It was just moving out of control. So I pulled the plug and ended up back in the consulting world after that.
That's exciting, but also stressful and troubling to hear. I mean, COVID killed lots of dreams like that. It's frustrating, but you did bring us into the trauma related experience, and you talked about, I'm sure you learned a lot in the entrepreneurial world going through that. You're able to apply. But back up a little bit to your dissertation and what that is and how that applies to the trauma-informed space.
Sure. Do you want me to talk about like what a dissertation is, or just sort of talk about mine specifically? I don't know what your audience knows when it comes to dissertations.
That's actually a good point. So tell us what a dissertation is, and then tell us about yours.
Sure. So a doctoral program is sort of 2 parts. There's the coursework. So you go to class for 3 years and you learn, theory and how theory involves your practice. But then towards the end, you decide on, or at least in our program, we decided on a problem of practice. So this is a problem that we found in our real world experience. And then we use the theory and the research that we've done to figure out how to maybe solve that problem. And so my dissertation focused on, so like I said, I was trauma informed. I studied and researched trauma for my master's, and 2020 comes, George Floyd happens, and everyone is so angry at the police, including me, right? And I know that you don't tackle a problem just by being mad at it, but you can focus your passion, you can focus that anger and that energy on finding innovative solutions. And that's what I wanted to do. I said, okay, I know all this work about trauma. I know how it changed my worldview and my ability to relate and cooperate with others. What would happen if we trauma-informed the police? So I started looking for research, and in 2020, there was nothing. There was no research, no literature on trauma-informed policing initiatives at that time. I can tell you everyone at USC, from my chair to the other faculty, to everyone involved, said, don't research the police. You're going to make your life miserable. Don't do this. Research veterans, research any other, research teachers, research SROs, research any other population except the police. And I said, no, because that tells me that this is a field that needs this type of research.
Good
so I went in, and they were absolutely right. It made my life super miserable for about a year because it was really hard. Police are super hesitant to get involved in research. They're not really, keen on getting involved with academics. So it took me a long time, but I found 1 or 2 officers who were just amazing. And then I snowball sampled from there. So they connected me with another officer who connected me with another officer. And I was able to develop a really deep and rich study on why trauma-informed policing initiatives work. And I had officers come out and tell me, and these are like, veteran officers who spent 30, 40 years on the field. And they're telling me, like, if you're not trauma-informed and you're a cop, and you're in the wrong field. This is the way policing is going to be, and this is the future of policing. So it was really great. It was great for me. It really connected me with the law enforcement community, and it made me excited to continue working with them.
So you weren't an MP, you weren't in the police force before this. So no. What is trauma? What is trauma informed? What does being trauma informed even mean?
It really means having an understanding of how trauma impacts human behavior, and you start to recognize bad behavior as sick behavior. So, for example, let's say you have a boss who's just a really bad micromanager, super controlling. They hire all these smart people, all these subject matter experts, and then they want to micromanage everything they do. That person clearly has issues with control. And what do we know about people with issues of control? They've got some trauma around being out of control, around not having control. So we can all understand that, right? We can relate to that. We understand what it feels like to have no control over our environment, no control over our situation. And we know what it feels like to want to just crack down and control little things around us. So that helped me learn to soften my edges towards people who were distributing, or not, excuse me, not distributing, but demonstrating that type of behavior. And once you learn to put those pieces together, because trauma impacts us at every stage throughout our life, but for the most part, it happens early in our childhood. We have a parent who was abusive, or who had substance use issues, or we were neglected, or no one heard us. So if you grow up as a child and your needs aren't met, you spend the rest of your life trying to get those needs met. And it really informs how you act as an adult. And learning that helped me see others through a different lens. And you can take that into any aspect of your career. For example, when I worked at body integration, I led a team of 40. And these were the most brilliant people I could find. A lot of them were engineers, chemical engineers, mechanical engineers. And we had two individuals in particular who just could not get along. And they were the smartest people on my team. They bottlenecked our work. They would argue on calls. They would not talk to each other unless I was in the room babysitting. So I took that trauma-informed experience and I pulled them aside, one-on-one. And one of them was a female. She was a PhD in chemical engineering. And she was older than me. She was in her late 50s. So I had her one-on-one and I heart to heart with her. And I said, what's going on here? Like, why are you over-explaining your calls? Like, what's going on? And she was broke down. And she said, listen, I came from a male-dominated field. My chair stole my research and used it as his own. So I've been getting, men have been getting credit for my work my entire life. I never feel like people hear me. I never feel like I'm being listened to. So I just told her, look, you're the smartest person in the room. I wouldn't have you on my team if I didn't think you were brilliant. But I need you on calls to state your piece and then stop right there. If anyone has a problem with what you're saying, then I'll cut in. But you just have to assume that I think you're the most brilliant person in the room. I hear you and I trust what you're saying. And then I went to the other engineer and I said, listen, stop being crappy to her, right? Don't be a jerk. Be kind. Be polite. She's had a rough struggle. She's used to not being heard. And you're reinforcing that because you ignore her. And after we had that conversation, everyone was able to get along. It seems so silly that I have to talk to other executives and other leaders and say, hey, figure out why your people are acting this way. Have a one-on-one with them. Get to the root cause of their issues, and I guarantee your problems will go away. But it works. And it's the same way in policing. If you're an officer and a female comes to you to report a sexual assault, first and foremost, you have to understand this is probably one of the hardest decisions she's ever had to make in her entire life. She knows that women aren't listened to in these, sometimes they are, and there are great cops out there who really know trauma-informed interrogation and trauma-informed interviewing, but there's a lot that don't. She knows she's up against the odds even by reporting this. Be kind, be compassionate. Don't come at her like a jackhammer. What happened? Give me all the details. Be compassionate. And if her timeline doesn't seem to add up, if if her reasoning isn't all there, understand that that's how the brain works in a traumatic situation. You're not going to get all the details. Your hippocampus in a traumatic event gets knocked offline, and that's how your memories are created and formed. So by understanding how the brain works and how neurobiology works, it'll make you a better interviewer and interrogator. So once I learned that and I started talking to cops about that, the light bulb just sort of goes on for them. They're like, wow, you can think back on how many investigations I ruined by coming at them too hard or not believing their story or, this, that, and the other. So it's really been, it's been a great experience for me watching that light bulb come on and then watch other officers talk about how wonderful learning about trauma has been for them.
It's a fantastic story, and I have lots of questions and comments about it. So I feel like you did.
Sorry if I rambled a bit there.
No, you did. It was great. So trauma from childhood can last forever, and we see. I believe that the research shows now that most people going through even these intense psychedelic programs, the trauma that comes out is usually tied back into childhood more so than the experiences of war.
Absolutely.
Can you comment a little bit about that?
Sure. So what we see typically with PTSD and with veterans is an acute trauma. So, and when I say acute, it doesn't just mean a single experience. It can be, acute over a deployment or acute, during your time in service versus it doesn't always become complex and chronic, but it typically does in childhood. If you grow up in an abusive childhood, let's say your dad has substance use issues, he drinks and he comes home, he beats your mom, he beats the kids. That is chronic trauma. And especially in early adolescence, your brain will rewire itself to survive in that traumatic environment. So you're going to become hypervigilant. You're going to become aggressive. You're going to, you might develop different types of behaviors that help you thrive in that childhood. Let's say the only way you can get by with your parents is through people pleasing. So you have to develop those type of pro-social behaviors that really make you submissive or whatever it is. Those then become lifelong patterns, and you're going to repeat them in other relationships. If you're used to and you're comfortable around an abuser, you're going to date abusers. You're going to be attracted to abusers. It's going to become lifelong. So that's the difference between CPTSD, which typically starts in childhood, or it can happen at any point in life, but it typically develops or starts at an early adolescence, versus an acute PTSD, which can be wartime or a specific abuse or something that you see out in the field. So there's a difference. They're both equally persistent. They're both equally complicated, and they're equally important to address, but there's just some differences in how we get there.
Do you think there's a higher incidence of individuals in the military having this traumatic childhood experiences? Did you find that in your research?
Absolutely. I know that both law enforcement and military, you think about it. You grow up as an abused kid, there's a good chance you're going to want to go up to help people. You're going to want to go up to be, to make the world a better place. And so, yes, we see a lot. There's something called an ACE score. ACEs are adverse childhood experiences. And I always, recommend that people figure out, you can go online, there's a website called ACEs Too High, and you can figure out what your own ACE score is. And what we know from the research is that law enforcement and military, they have higher baseline ACE scores going into those fields than the general population. So that just makes you even more likely to then be affected by trauma in the long.
Thank you for that. I'm going to say thank you for the science words there. I have a good friend in this space that we talk about this sometimes, and he refers to military taking in broken toys. And
exactly.
The ACE score kind of goes hand with that, so you can actually see how that affects you. And I think that having this kind of knowledge out there, not intending for anybody to be self-diagnosing themselves, but having an awareness that these things exist can help people find their way back better, faster. So with this impressive knowledge of trauma-informed counseling and trauma-informed consultation, what was it the George Floyd experience that was unfolding on TV that brought you to the police force with this knowledge experience?
Yeah, it was that. And prior to George Floyd, just in a few years prior, I dated a SWAT officer, a police officer, and he was just a mental health mess. There's just no way around it. And I knew that at some point something was going to happen on the job. He was going to get injured, or he was going to get sidelined, and his mental health was going to unravel. And I did my best. I'm not a practitioner. I'm not a therapist. I'm not a counselor. I did my best to get him to be sort of self-reflective and proactively, and it just wasn't there. But it did get my wheels turning, and I started thinking like, okay, well, that's not my path. I mean, that was not our path together. But what if other law enforcement, law enforcement and military, what if while I'm teaching them about trauma in civilians, what if they learn a little bit about trauma in themselves? And what if that allows them to be a little bit self-reflective? And you're absolutely right. You can't self-diagnose. But if you start thinking and you start recognizing patterns in your own behavior, that's what got me to therapy. I had a CPTSD diagnosis stemming from childhood. I had issues with interpersonal relationships my entire life, and the feedback was always consistent, right? And I didn't want to believe it. I didn't want to believe that I was the problem. They're weak. They're the problem. They need to grow up. They need to man up. It wasn't me. And finally, in my probably early 30s, I was like, damn, I seem to be the common denominator here, right? Everyone has the same feedback. So if everyone's telling me the same thing about my behavior and how it impacts them, maybe I'm the problem. And I wasn't ready for therapy yet, but it got my wheels turning. And then I started learning a little bit about trauma and a little bit about PTSD. And it's like, okay, I do sort of have some of these behaviors. Maybe I should get into therapy. Day one, my therapist is like, I think you have PTSD. And I was like, this ain't the therapist for me. She obviously doesn't know what she's talking about, right? So I disengaged. A few years later, I went back. I found another therapist, and immediately. She's like, you have CPTSD. So I think that teaching people to be reflective, not to diagnose themselves, but to be reflective, learn some of these patterns of behavior and see if maybe you see yourself in that, and then get yourself in that.
That was very big of you for sharing that here with us. That's fantastic. Thank you for that, because people need to hear it, right? We don't hear it enough, but you demonstrated what I think is crucial for veterans in this, in not just veterans, but I'm speaking veterans because of our healthcare system, for individuals to be able to understand their behavior and how it affects others. But if you don't know what's out there, and you don't know what you don't know, then how can you understand it, right? So people in this space, we need to hear from others who have figured out their way through these kind of situations. We see too much on the news, the mental health situation around veteran service, and that goes all the way back into childhood. And there's a lot happening. I think the VA healthcare system has came a long way since I've been a part of it, but we still see lots of incidences on the news and social media. They're needing to be more. So any effort to bring highlight to this space is great, especially when it's one of us. So you reminded me of one of the readings from our program. What year did you graduate?
Last year, 2023, just celebrating my 1 year graduation anniversary.
Okay, well, congratulations on that.
Thank you.
And so I imagine it was part of your curriculum too. I don't remember the author, but I will share it with you after. It was about anesthesiologists and how they have to train, not just them, but the book was written by, or the article was written by an anesthesiologist about how you train yourself at the highest levels. And like, for example, Kobe Bryant and LeBron James were used as examples for who's teaching the experts and how do they get better. And a lot of it comes through self-reflection, literally watching videos of yourself. Yes. Now, we don't all have video footage of ourselves doing our jobs. Except in your head, your mental head, if you're replaying yourself at the end of the day, at lunchtime, during breaks, to see, reflecting on what's happening at that point, if you do it more often, you'll have that more clear mental movie of yourself. But in actual training at people at the highest level, people who are the best in their field, they literally go into analyzing their own habits. So I think we can all do that a little bit and analyze our habits and how we perform, right?
Definitely. Yeah, absolutely. If you're not reflecting back on the work you're doing, there's really no room for growth, because you don't know where the mistakes, what mistakes you've made and where you have to. And I think you have to be really, really hypercritical with yourself, not in a negative, not criticize yourself, but you have to say, like, what, why am I maybe not reaching my goals? Or what could I be doing better? Or, man, I don't feel good about that interaction I just had with so-and-so. What could I have done? Could I have been kinder? Could I have been more compassionate? Could I have listened more? Could I have been more understanding? So yeah, absolutely. I think that growth comes from reflection.
I want to take you back into how you're rolling this out to police forces and such. See, you were executive director of the American Society of Evidence-Based Policing for some time. What was that role?
It was interesting. I expected that to be a little different than it was. They weren't ready for an executive director yet. They're just not there in there. The organization itself isn't there where they can support an executive director. But, the goal was to really come in and get that off the ground, to really push evidence-based policing practices. I think that we are really at a time where police are starting to listen and they're starting to look to the research. There's a 20-year evidence to action gap in law enforcement. And it's 20 years, Derek. It kills me as a researcher, especially in someone in the trauma space. I'll talk to police and they'll mention the READ technique, which is an investigative technique that has been debunked for decades, and they still use it. And so, that kills me. So that's really why I wanted to get involved with ASCPP, because I think finally police are starting to, we're venturing into a modern era of policing, and police are starting to listen to researchers and to academics, and they're starting to say, okay, we realize that maybe the way that we did things over the last few decades are not the best way. So what else can we learn? So yeah, I worked for ASCPP for a little while. They just weren't ready for me to to take over yet, but I wish them the best, and I'm still working in the law enforcement space.
So now we got evidence-based policing, we had trauma-informed policing, we have a 20 years evidence to action rate.
Yeah.
This sounds very much like low-hanging fruit, opportunity for improvement here.
Right.
So what does it mean to be evidence-based, and how is that not the current situation? That seems counterintuitive and hard
Yes.
to understand.
That's a great question. Evidence-based means exactly that. If you're going to come up with a new intervention, a new method, a new technique, you can just make it up. You can do what feels good, or you can turn to the research and say, what do we know that works, right? What do we know? Here's an example. My partner works for corrections. And the other day we were debating, how do you reduce violence in corrections in a jail facility? So this is not a prison where people are there for longer term. This is jail where the average length of stay is maybe 30 to 50 days. At an incredibly violent facility, how do you reduce violence? Well, you can lock people away for longer, right? So maybe you just don't let them out of cells you only let them out of cells for 4 hours a day. Will that reduce violence? Sure. In the short term, it will. But what are you doing about the long-term ramifications for mental health for those individuals? And what most people don't realize is that 95% of all people in custody will eventually be released into society. So do we want to rehabilitate them? And do we want to incorporate more programs, interventions that are rehabilitative, that will help them once they are released? Or do we just want to put them behind bars in cages for longer periods of time? So that's a great opportunity to implement evidence-based research. What does evidence and research tell us about locking people up for longer periods of time? Is it good for their mental health? Absolutely not. Does it make them more violent in the long run? Absolutely. So if you want to reduce violence, do you want to look at punitive measures that have short-term outcomes, but really are detrimental in the long term? Or do you want to look at what are some, long-term interventions that can reduce violence? And some of those include intrinsic motivators, right? We know there's a difference between intrinsic motivation for behavior and extrinsic motivation for behavior. So for, let's say a child, or let's say an adult, an intrinsic motivator would be like, well, I feel fulfilled at work. So I want to do the best job that I can. I love my job. They take good care of me. They allow me to develop myself professionally. I want to stay here long term. That's an intrinsic motivator versus an extrinsic motivator, which would be like, if you meet this sales goal, you'll get an extra $1,000. Okay, so I'm going to work real hard to hit that goal, but then I'm not motivated to work hard anymore. That's where evidence-based and research-based interventions come into play. You have to turn to the research and say, what do we know about human behavior? What do we know about evidence? What do we know about research? And then guide your practices based on that.
That's an interesting point for the corrections space, right? And the importance of rehabilitation.
Right.
There's probably a bigger problem with getting people into those facilities, right?
Yes.
What is the evidence-based policing gap there mean?
In corrections?
No, in policing. I'm concerned about the 20-year,
Evidence
knowledge gap, but then further upstream in terms of the individuals going into the system, right? Mm-hmm. So what does evidence-based policing mean in terms of is there a gap in the actual police force in doing evidence-based investigations now?
Absolutely. Yes, it depends. And, we've got, almost 18,000 police departments in this country, right? And there's no national standards when it comes to training or policy. And most states don't even, have unified training. So and that makes sense because there are maybe 250, 300 really large departments. You're talking about NYPD or, LAPD. These are huge departments. You can't expect them to run the same way that a small department of, 12 officers is going to run. They're going to have different complexities. They're going to have different problems. They're going to have different issues. So it's really hard to have a sort of unified national training standard. But what that leaves is that leaves every department, it's every man for themselves when it comes to policing and law enforcement. And I did some research last year, and I spoke to sheriffs and chiefs I spend more money on dog food every month than they spend on their training budget, right? So it's like, how do we get them? Yeah, and if they can't get grant funding, let's say they don't have a grant writer on staff, writing grant, I don't know if you've ever written a grant, it's a nightmare. I just wrote a 20-page grant yesterday. I don't expect some rank and file officer to be able to do that. I literally have a doctorate. I know how to write. I don't expect officers to know how to do that. So I don't expect them to understand how to pay for funding, how to pay for training. It's really difficult. That's why there is that evidence to action gap. How do you expect, if you're a small and rural department, where are you getting your research? There's paywalls in place, right? So how do you, even if you want to find research, how are you going to get it? How are you going to know to just pair up with an academic or a researcher or a research institution? It's really, really difficult. And until we can sort of make those improvements or have more organizations, nonprofits and such that are in place to help police departments train and get this research, that evidence to action gap is going to stay there. A lot of the bigger departments, NYPD, they've got researchers on staff, they've got analysts on staff. They're a little more modern. But some of these small rural departments, they're still living in the 1970s and 80s, and it's really no fault of their own.
Well, you're educating me right now, that's for sure. So we have the legal bar to pass, and that varies per state, but that is a statewide. I don't know if there's a federal bar.
Yeah.
We have medical boards. I think those are also state run. Are there at least state run police standardization boards for states? Or are you telling me that the only overarching document covering police standards in this United States is our Constitution?
I mean, to be honest, for the most part, everything falls back on the Constitution. And that's why you hear so frequently constitutional policing, because that's really our guiding document in the world of policing. But yes, many states like California and a lot of the larger states, I don't know if it's every state. I know at least most states have a post, and that is that's where the training, the standards and training come from. But again, it's up to each state. So each state can sort of pick and choose the type of training that they want to post certify or that they don't. And it's not always easy to get training certified as well. I work with a few nonprofits. Police to Peace is one in particular that is very near and dear to my heart. And it's difficult for them to get, they're able to get this post standard, this post training certification, but it's not easy. And, they're led by a woman who is just an absolute juggernaut. She came from the tech world, and she's amazing. Not all nonprofits are, run by people who spent 20 or 30 years in the private sector just, killing it. So it's difficult to get these trainings passed. It's really, really an uphill battle. And you have to have a chief or a sheriff who really wants to drag their organization into the 21st century. That can be difficult as well. I think one of the things we learned from the doctoral program is that change is hard and not everyone is ready for it. And status quo is always going to be easier.
Yes. But you're really uncovering a huge problem here, right? Mm-hmm. And so for our listeners who probably experience that most training that you get in corporations is terrible. And doesn't stick, right? And so you have that layer, and now you've got to figure out what organizations are providing training specific to police organizations who are willing to withstand the grueling contract cycle that occurs within that and the funding and budget. So I don't know a lot of people in this space, a lot of training in this space, but I imagine the folks delivering this training work very hard to get the contracts, but it's probably underfunded, under budget. And here we are again, going back to nonprofits, closing the gap on educating people who are in charge of our defense or defending us or protecting us or something like that. What is the nonprofit space that is assisting police forces? What does it look like compared to the nonprofit space providing training to veterans and such?
You know what? That's a good question. I'm assuming it's pretty similar. I don't know where veteran nonprofits get their funding. I mean, I'm sure it's federal government, but I'm not exactly sure which administrations. For like law enforcement, BJA, Bureau of Justice Administration, that's one, and OJP, NIJ, they give grants to these nonprofits, but you're absolutely right about it being underfunded. The kicker is a lot of them will only pay by the hour. It'll be like $80 an hour. Whereas, I'm sure in the consulting world, $80 an hour for a consultant is a joke. I know, I'm a consultant and I have friends who are consultants, and it's like they won't even look at a document for under $150, $200 an hour. And these are for independent consultants. If you want to go to a firm, if you want to go to a Deloitte, you're talking $400, $300, $400, $700 an hour. So to say that the federal government will only pay these nonprofits $81 an hour to implement this training, you have to find people who are just so passionate about the work that they're willing to do it at such a reduced rate, because they could easily get hired at a KPMG or a Deloitte and make $300, $400 an hour. So it really sort of divides like who's in it for the right reason and who's in it because, they want to make money. So if you're looking for passionate people, you're going to look in that nonprofit space. And I'm assuming it's the same way for the veteran space. If you really want to find people who are passionate about veteran assistance, you're going to find them in the nonprofit space. You're not going to find them in the consulting space.
So on funding and this policing space, there was a slogan or a motto or something from a while back that was defund the police, right?
Yeah.
And then there was there I think there is pretty good evidence of the militarization of police.
Yeah.
Recently, I did see where a couple of universities had completely closed down their DEI organizations and transferred those funds over to the campus police.
Yeah.
I also heard of, and I've spoke about the idea of, increasing the number of mental health providers who are part of the police force, a ratio of, one mental health provider per X number of police officers or citizens or something. I don't know I'm not the expert in this space, but something more to help with the mental health of like on the scene when crimes are happening, but also in the office, in the back room with the officers. What can you share with us about that space and any thoughts on the topic?
Sure. So, let's talk a little bit about we have militarized our police departments. That's exactly what we've done over the last few decades. It really started with the war on drugs and the war on crime, right? And the problem with that is the military and our police departments don't have the same mission. And they shouldn't have the same mission because, we're military. We know what our mission was. Do we want our police to feel the same way? Do we want to be seen as the others by our police, or do we want our police to be peace officers, which is essentially what they should be in this country? That's why I work so hard with Police to Peace. So I'm all for demilitarizing the police, but you can't do that by defunding the police, right? You have to fund them even more because you can only do that through education and training, right? You can't just strip them of all their military grade equipment. You have to train them differently. And that means cultural change, which as you and I know, doesn't happen overnight, and it's not easy. This is not a webinar that comes in, 30 minutes, you check this box, and now you're peace officers, and you go on your way, and you're no longer teasing or using excessive use of force. It doesn't work like that. We're talking about fundamentally overhauling not just police departments, but the policing system we have in the United States today. And it takes money, it takes funding, it takes resources, it takes research and evidence-based training to get us there. And on top of that, it takes mental health providers. And that means for police as well. We're very heavily focused on how police traumatize civilians, but we have to recognize that police are also suffering from trauma as well, whether it's pre-established before they even join the force or it's something they're picking up while they're there. We have to treat them too. We can't ask police to show compassion for citizens unless we're willing to do the same for them. So yes, you're absolutely right. More departments need mental health professionals. They need mental health training because, a lot of them have EAP, which is employee assistance programs, and cops just don't trust those. So they need better options, which it's the same for the military. Imagine if your first argument is like, hey, something's off with you, go sit with this shrink. It's never going to happen. And if you do, it's going to be mandated a mandated hour. You're not going to open up. You're not going to be vulnerable. So we need to, again, turn to the research and say, okay, how do law enforcement officers want to engage with mental health professionals? Is it through EAP? Is it through peer support? Is it through a paid program where they can pick their own provider that's not someone affiliated with their department? That's where we need to get to. And again, you can't get there by defunding the police. I know it sounds good. You say defund the police, we're mad at them, let's take away their money. It's not how we make things better. We need more funding, we need more resources, and we need more evidence-based practices.
That was a great addition to this conversation. I really appreciate it. You really took another perspective there that some people really kind of need to hear because of, as you said, sometimes it does feel good to say defund the police, right? Mm-hmm. But we got to remember there are great cops out there who are doing it for the right reasons. And how are they getting help? Because I can tell you that some of them see worse things than we see overseas as veterans. It's pretty consistent for some. But not necessarily, not across the board. But how, it's a good point. It's how are they getting the help that they need? Back to that paper that I referenced about from anesthesiologists, how are those experts getting trained and finding the space to deal with their trauma that they have experienced or experiencing and are about to experience? And how does that relate to proper policing? There's a lot happening there with not a lot of funding.
Definitely.
With the current political situation, and raising and lowering of taxes, defunding this and the other. I mean, how much are we as citizens expecting or anticipating nonprofits to be the answer here?
I think a lot of the slack is falling in the nonprofit space. I think that's why there are so many federal grants available to help fund them, just because there's really not, one of the issues we deal with in this country is we don't delve into it. We don't want to solve the root cause of problems, right? And so we just want to put Band-Aids on stuff over and over and over again. You can't just say, okay, well, now we're going to crack down on, let's say, officers who use excessive use of force. So we're not going to retrain them. We're not going to overhaul their department. We're not going to bring in leadership. We're not going to do that. We're just going to crack down and we're going to start arresting officers who use excessive uses of force, right? So what does that do? Then that causes law enforcement, officers and personnel to flee the field because they're like, okay, this is, this society got us into this. Society wanted us to be hard on drugs and hard on crime. They gave us these military grade weapons, and this is what they want, right? We made this dinner, and now we don't want to eat it, right? That's just kind of what we do in this country. So we're not solving the root cause of these issues, and then we're just throwing Band-Aids wherever we can. So, okay, let's arrest officers who use excessive use of force. Well, now we're in a recruitment and retention crisis in law enforcement. We're finally, just in the last couple months, starting to see the first turnaround, really since George Floyd. But in 2020, 2021, 2022, it was a mass exodus from law enforcement. And again, 20-year evidence to action gap, no one knew what to do. So we're just trying we're really just trying to figure that out now. And again, it falls on these nonprofits who are passionate about it and who want to, really make a difference, and will do it at half the cost of some of these big firms. You can look up, and this is not knocking the big four or any consulting firm in any way, shape, or form, but you can look up incidences where, law enforcement agencies paid millions and millions of dollars to bring in a KPMG or a Deloitte, and violence went up, crime went up. And it's because they're just not as passionate about this field as a nonprofit. So we have to sort of decide in this country what we want to see and how we want our military or our police to perform. And then that's where we have to start putting our funding. So if you're out there and you have, and you're willing to donate to some of these nonprofits, find out what nonprofits are in your state that are doing good things with the police or the military. Find out who's really making an impact and throw some cash their way because they're hurting.
So I guess I didn't realize there was a mass exodus or a recruiting retention problem but it makes sense with the pay level and the trauma level.
Yeah.
And same thing with the veterans.
Yes.
There's a huge recruiting and retention crisis now.
Yeah.
And that they're battling. But on this same note, you brought up something that I think I read, but I wasn't. I didn't. I hope I wasn't. I keep thinking that I couldn't be right, but I guess I have to ask you. Um, that it appeared that some uh, how do I say this appropriately? Some police forces were now deputizing um, recently crossing the border illegal immigrants as police officers. And you're nodding your head, so there must be some validity to that. Tell me what you know about that.
I don't know a ton about that, but I have heard of it in desperate times call for desperate measures. I have heard about police departments, deputizing civilians or, literally anyone they can because there's just no one to do the job. So does that sound like a good idea to me? No, I don't think, do you want your law enforcement professionals to not have any type of standards or training, or do you want them to be in essentially starvation mode? No, of course not. They might sound, great on this side of the fence, but when you're on the other side of that, is that the kind of person you want to be policed by? Someone who's had no training, has no experience, no education in this, and is just like, well, we're struggling, so we're just going to make you, we're going to make you a deputy for the day. It's, come on, that's it. This is the United States. We should be better.
So back to the whole kind of connection to the military.
Mm-hmm.
People can come here and join our military, be from any other country, and then get their citizenship while they're in, or after they get out, or never get their citizenship. We see that as well, but can still serve in our military. How is it different for them coming here and serving on the police force?
You know what? I don't know. That's really nuanced and it's really complex. I don't have a great answer for that. I can see pros and cons to both, but I think it falls back on training. Are we doing this because it's the right thing to do, or are we doing this out of an act of desperation because we have no other options? If we can't find anyone to fill these roles, should we just wing it, or do we need to go back to the root cause of the problem and start maybe focusing our efforts there?
I don't know how much time you have after we run this to 1:30, but you're from New York, and
Yeah.
I think you're the mayor of New York City. I just made a comment about hiring immigrants who had just swam as lifeguards because they were good swimmers.
Yeah,
Do you hear that storyline, or
I
that
did.
kind of feels like the same situation? And this just came to me when I remembered you were from New York, and I saw him saying that on television again. Does that make sense to you?
So yes and no. I think that in the moment he sort of chose it came off as a little tone deaf, right? To say like these people are great swimmers and we need lifeguards. I don't think he meant it. Yeah, exactly. I see you shaking your head, and I think that's how everyone heard it. It was a little tone deaf moment, but I think the underlying principle that he was trying to get across there stands true. We have all these people here, but we can't allow them to work because there's bureaucracy and red tape in the way. They want to work. They've got skills that we need in the workforce right now. Let's cut through the red tape. Let's cut through the BS. Let's let them work. In that case, I can agree with that. And I think that that's right. He's not saying let's let, unskilled, untrained. He's saying these people have the skills and we need workers with these skills. Let's cut through the BS and get them these jobs that they're qualified for. I think that's a little different, but I totally agree with you. I think that the way you said it in the moment, I think he should have used maybe a different metaphor for that. I think it came off as a little tone deaf, but I saw his follow-up statement and I can agree with what he said in principle. So it's not what he said.
Yeah, I didn't follow the story that much
Yeah,
after I saw that piece. So thank you for the context.
absolutely.
So how how do police chiefs do this? How do they get better right now with no additional budget? What's available to them for free to help them become more educated in this space? I mean, I guess woke is the wrong word, or is the right word. I don't know if that even how it applies, but like be more aware and cognizant of this 20-year gap, and how can we help them help us?
Yeah, I think you just said it. It's being aware and being cognizant, right? Um, the first step in change is recognizing that there's a need for change. And if you can't even get there, if you think you do everything right and your department or your agency is the greatest and there's no room for improvement, then you know what? There's probably no room for improvement because they're not going to get you past that first step, right? So the first step is really being cognizant and saying like, okay, maybe, here are some issues that our department is experiencing, or here's some problems, some challenges. What can we do to make it better? And then they can do the same thing that someone like you and I would do. When I wanted to develop body integration, the first thing I did was started researching. And that doesn't mean, academic journals. I got a group of gym rats together. And I said, what do we hate about gyms? And we made a list of all the things that we absolutely despise about gyms. I don't want to sign an annual contract. What if I hate your gym, right? What if you implement some new policy, or something happens and I don't want to go to your gym anymore? I just have to be stuck there for 4 more months, sign a contract. All right, contracts have to go. So that's literally the first step, realizing there's a problem and then turning to the research. And the research can just be a group of peers. It can be a group of other professionals. It can be professional networks. It can be LinkedIn, asking questions. It can be Google. It can be ChatGPT, right? Finding out what are the problems, and then what are other organizations, departments, people doing to address those problems. What does the research say? And that can, like I said, doesn't have to be an academic journal. It can be the research you do online, or the research you do through asking people in the professional network. I think that's a great start. And from there, you set small goals, small attainable goals with a metric attached to it. I want to increase this behavior by this much by this date, or I want to decrease this behavior by this much by this date. And you work towards those goals, and you start small and you get big. You develop a 5-year plan. Anyone can set a goal. I don't care if your goal is, I want to make sure I get the mail every day before 2 p.m. Maybe it's a dumb goal, but if that's your goal and you can knock that out for a week, then set a bigger goal for the next week, and then set a bigger goal for the next month. It's the same way whether it's a professional goal or a personal goal. You start small and you go from there.
How should people in this space contact you to help support their changes with their organizations?
Oh, absolutely. I'm on LinkedIn. So it's Dr. Michelle Gundy on LinkedIn. Or is it okay if I give out my email address?
Sure, go for it. It's up to
Absolutely.
you.
I'm always happy to help, especially veterans, right? I have a soft spot for veterans. Okay, perfect. My email address is Michelle Gundy, MichellelleGundy @gmail.com. I'm happy to give it to you. You can throw my LinkedIn in your notes or whatever you want. Any veterans that are out there, especially, I'm always willing to talk to them.
Once I get the ability to add, links and post pictures, I'll, doing graphics and stuff.
There you go.
But so here you are now, doing this work that you love in a space that really needs it. But I'm taking it back to 07, 08 when you got out and you were parking cars for valet. Yeah. Is this the dream you had? How is it different?
Not even a little bit. I had no idea back then. Let me tell you, I had no clue what I was going to do or who I was going to be. I'm still not 100% sure. I just turned 40 last year and, graduated from the doctoral program, and I'm in a new space, and my career is really, I'm in a new place right now. I don't know. So no, back then I had absolutely no idea what I wanted to do. I did know that I wanted, and I have no idea, to be honest with you, where this goal came from. But at some point in my young years, I decided I wanted to be a doctor by 40. And I became a doctor at 39. And so, it doesn't matter if it's a short-term goal or a lifetime goal. Make goals for yourself. And that's what I did. I had no idea what I was going to do when I got out of the Army. I thought I was going to be a lifer. So when First Sergeant came to me and said, listen, this is not a safe environment for you anymore. I really think that you need ETS. That came out of left field. I was like, well, what am I going to do with my life? I had no idea. And there wasn't the veteran support back then that there is now. And I know that even now it can be confusing and hard to navigate and complicated. But there are some supports out there, and there's help for veterans out there. So my best advice is use it. Use that support and use your network. Create a network. That's one thing I really failed at. Until, I would say, honestly, until the doctoral program, I failed at creating a network. And you've just got to do that. It doesn't matter if it's 2007 or 2024. You're not going to get a job unless you know someone. We have just destroyed the hiring process to the point where you have to know someone. I got that valet job because my first sergeant knew the valet manager. So times have not changed in the last 20 years. You've got to know people. So expand your network. And I think one really important piece of that everyone gets wrong when it comes to networking is people go into networking thinking, what can these people do for me? Flip that. going to a networking event or networking experience thinking, what can I do for these people? If you spend your career being a kingmaker, right? So supporting others, promoting others, helping others get forward, they will bring you with them. That is just how it happens. And I really focus on that in the doctorate program. I started making connections, connecting people I know to other people I know. People remember that. They have since then come back to me and said, hey, I've got a consulting job for you now. Are you interested? So that's some advice I would really give to veterans, especially if they're young in their career, they're just transitioning out. Network and learn what you can. When you meet someone, ask them questions and start thinking like, what can I do for this person? Who do I know that might be able to help this person or that might be a good connection for this person? And then follow up and say, hey, I remember, I don't know if you remember we spoke at this event. I know you talk about this, and I know someone in that space I would like to connect you to. People will remember that you did that for them versus just you reaching out and saying, hey, I met you at this networking event. I'm looking for this. I need this. I want this help. If you flip it, you'll really get something.
That's fantastic advice. I support every bit of it.
Good.
And I want to also co-sign on your making goals comment. Not just making them, but also writing them down. The power of writing down your goals is huge. But I do think that lots of us get out and we just we make maybe soft goals and we forget about some of the motivations, and we maybe don't realize that there are resources available to help you find those goals. But you got to put some effort into understanding yourself and what you really want to go do.
Definitely. Yeah, I couldn't agree.
I will thank you for your time. I hope to have you on here again soon once I understand more about trauma-informed policing and evidence-based policing. And I appreciate it. And what else can I do for you?
Nothing. I want to just take a second to thank you. Actually, I love what you're doing for the veteran community. You reached out to me as a veteran when we were still in school to help me with some stuff. And that's why I'm returning the favor today. I'll do anything you ever need because you helped me in my time of need. So I appreciate everything you're doing. You're one of the few people that actually put your money where your mouth is. I appreciate that. And I hope that your community continues to follow you and all the hard work.
Thank you, Dr. Michelle Gundy. We'll talk to you again.
Thank you, Doctor.
Have a great day.
Thanks. You too. Take care.